So I'm going to kind of address Luke's questions. So TCEQ is working on some state regulations for those facilities, but they really do come back to the same types of things we're looking at in our land use. The things that don't happen out in a county setting is you could put these anywhere because there is no land use restrictions, where a city who can adopt zoning does have some land use restrictions. The decommissioning plans, so far TCEQ has not mentioned anything like that, and I think it'd probably be with ERCOT maybe even as well of how to decommission things. We're just going off of what the Department of Energy and the American Clean Energy folks are saying this is how you should, because this isn't, for them, a clean energy source, whether it's reusing off of the grid or whether you're using solar to charge those batteries or wind to charge those batteries. That's what they're recommending, because they know over time, until technology even gets better and better, and it's advancing all the time, those batteries will have to be changed out periodically, and then what do you do with those chemical batteries at some point? I think our goal is to not have that be a burden down the road on the tax base of, well, here's this bad site. No one is going to mitigate it, so okay, the city, county, or whoever has to go and mitigate this site at the taxpayer expense. So that's kind of our goal there. The air, and I might lean on Michael Looney. He's kind of also a resident expert, as they've been working with some folks and has some resident experts as far as the air and the water mitigation stuff, and he can probably help explain that a little clearer than what I can. There are some distances, there are some ways to do it. He might be able to explain a little bit better, because we are wanting to partner with them in this, because they know there are people looking in our community. We want to make sure that we have the right places for them to get it done, and then go be able to get them through the process, so if they do it correctly, that they're allowed.
Okay. So, real quick, I think what you went over is very good, and I think we ought to try to utilize it in the more industrial commercial areas.
Yeah,
if possible, as well as stipulating the things.
I'm inclined to support in industrial areas where we already have some of these hazards.
Have any other cities adopted anything that are similar to us?
there are a number of cities in Texas that are looking to adopt. They're in the same process that we are right now, because Texas has kind of opened up to say, please come. And there's good reasons for us. I mean, we had an event a few years ago that showed that our electrical grid system is not as great as we hoped.
Yeah.
It's vulnerable, yeah. And these are ways to, so if you think about a 1 megawatt system, that can power 833 homes up to 4 hours just on the batteries. So that's a pretty significant thing for our community at times. Doesn't need it all the time, but there are times that that'd be great to have. How do we do those things so that we are getting the benefits out of these as well as mitigating some of the risks?
Okay, cool.
So.
Okay. Should I open it up for discussion?
Discussion, or we'll just look awkward here.
Would anyone like to speak on this?
Thank you, Aaron. I'm Michael Looney. I'm the VP of Economic Development with the San Angelo Chamber of Commerce. We serve the coast of DC as a contractor and also the county. So we pull for both teams, creating a unified effort for regional economic development. Currently, we have 4 battery energy storage system projects in various stages of pre-construction negotiations. They range from 200 megawatts to 9.99 megawatts. These are small containerized systems that skirt some of the higher regulations put upon them, larger developments by ERCOT. They are not directly related to the renewable sector, but they're derivatives of the renewable sector. So over the past 8 years, our department has worked with the county on 3 solar power projects located in the county, one built by Duke Energy, one built by Korea Midland Power Company, and the other built by Apex. Battery energy storage was installed at the Apex Angelo solar facility, which is a 195 megawatt solar plant built on the west side of the city, west side of the city limits, just outside the city limits, kind of out near the state park. And they installed a battery energy storage system of 100 megawatts AC power. The current battery energy storage systems that we're in negotiations with are not related to renewables, meaning they're not deriving their power from the renewable source. The 100 meg that's built out on the site of the Apex Angelo solar facility does not derive its power directly from the solar power plant. What they're doing is they're absorbing power off the grid at lower prices when there's low use, and storing it, and then dispatching it whenever there's a demand from ERCOT to get more power onto the grid in a certain section of the state. And they're usually selling it at a slightly higher rate. So it's a very small spread on a per kilowatt hour basis. So that's how they're making their money. They're all private. There's no other types of funding sources. There are usually some assistance requests of different municipalities for some of these projects. Slight tax deferrals or removal for the first couple of years, small percentages relatively. Usually they're a 30 to a 40-year contract between the power company and any heirs to that contract and the landowner. So they're private projects. They're not government mandated, and they're not a response directly to the, as Luke mentioned, the winter storm that hit us in 21. There was no state mandate to investigate or invest in privately developed dispatchable power. It's just an organic function of the market. Texas has seen about 50% of the battery energy storage in the country, and so we're a leader in that sense. They do not provide dispatchable power to the neighborhood that they sit in. Indirectly they would, because they're just putting power onto the state grid, which then gets vectored to the certain areas that need it. The systems do have internal fire suppression systems, and we feel confident as economic developers inviting these projects into the county and into the city that they're very effective systems. The cells are stood up in racks, and they have firewalls between them to prevent what's called thermal runaway. So you have one battery lighting up another battery. And so we feel pretty confident, very confident in the battery suppression, fire suppression system. So they do have an internal system for that. They usually will build a revetment around the facility itself in case there's any contamination. They build it kind of like a containment pad. And what we found is that this is a pretty new world. So these battery energy storage developers are looking to the municipalities for input and guidance on any specific design requests. And they've been very, very open to suggestion. In fact, they're asking municipalities to partner with them, which is really why Aaron's brought this to the fore with this organization, with this body, because of the projects that we have underway where they're asking us as a collective, tell us specifically how you want us to be the best neighbor possible. So we're finding that to be very constructive. One thing that we are also mindful of is that these are very expensive developments. I mean, they run between the bigger ones run between $100 and $200 million a piece to construct. And we understand that there's a direct correlation with the tax base. They require no people. They don't require employees. Once it's constructed, it's basically a self-sustaining robot that runs itself. It's managed usually electronically from great distances away and doesn't put any pressure on our labor shed, which is a good thing when you're in a market that is now at about 3.2% unemployment. So we have a good problem, is what we have. So we're looking for ways to participate and continue to participate as a community in the power production for the state. and also generate tax revenue for the city. And so one of the reasons for this discussion is that the natural inclination of these types of developments is just to put yourself next to a substation, as you mentioned, Travis, as close as you can out in the county. And you don't have to deal with the city at all. Maybe some EPA and TCEQ regulations, but those are, you're basically just building a box on a pad, so they feel like they can get around those and comply with those pretty quickly. But we like them for the ability to kick off good tax revenue to this city, because as the city grows, we need every penny of it.
Yeah.
We're mindful, and they're mindful of that too. They have no problems with that at all. So that,
some of these other markets that are kind of at the same stage that we're currently in with discussions, are they trying, since it basically is an unmanned station and the power that's being generated isn't necessarily benefiting the neighborhood directly, as you mentioned, indirectly down the road, are they focusing them more in the heavy manufacturing areas? Just because, again, it's not, maybe they don't have the same landscaping guidelines or whatever. Like, where are other cities trying to concentrate them? Do we know that?
that's a good question. Most of the cities that we've seen examples of these being developed in are high-density cities that are looking to them for a participation from these companies as revenue generators for the municipality. So they're trying to put them anywhere they can.
Okay.
And there are some cities in the Houston area that are trying to fit these things where they probably don't naturally want to belong, but they happen to be sort of near or close enough for market purposes to a substation. And that's where you're seeing a lot of the friction. So where a neighborhood would naturally want to organically progress into, you're putting a battery energy storage array. And some of these things are huge, 200 to 400 megawatts in size. So it's a big facility. In our area, we're focusing them two things, in the industrial areas and near the substations.
Are there multiple sites and locations that fit those criteria
Yes.
within our community?
On the outskirts, on the outer perimeters,
It's the substations that tend to be the limiting factor.
Sure.
Because as neighborhoods grow, and they may grow towards a substation that was out, 50 acres away from something, but now the neighborhood has grown out that way. And so you just saw even on one of the plats we were looking at this morning, there's a substation right against the railroad track, but now
Yes.
that neighborhood has grown down to that area. And
Yeah.
so there's just not a lot of space there. That's one of I think, the areas that will come into conflict. And so do we limit by zone, or do we limit by setbacks? Do we limit by other means so that they still have access to a substation to still get the benefits, but still protect whatever the risks are, mitigate some of the risks? And that's a challenge, to be honest with you. Because
And this-
we've allowed our substations to be built in every zoning district, basically. So substations can be just about anywhere.
So just out of
They're a
curiosity,
necessity.
They are.
so like, for instance, looking in Southland off Walnut Hill, we've got energy substation there. Residential homes near that kind of have a little bit of a stigma. Either one, your home's not valued as much because you're sitting next to the power area. And two, there's certain people that feel that power generation like that has health risks, et cetera. What kind of risks are we looking at as a battery storage, like as far as?
they have a very low magnetic frequency, so it's not like a power station.
Right.
Because what you're talking about are EMFs,
Right.
electromagnetic frequencies. I don't have a lot of data on that right now. I have it back at the office.
Yeah, no, you're fine. I
But,
just wanted to-
and I didn't know I'd be talking about EMFs, but it's an excellent point. That discussion has been largely sidestepped with the negotiations we have going with the current battery energy storage systems, because they're not near residences or any businesses for that matter at all. Now, it doesn't mean that they couldn't infill around them over time, and likely they probably would. But these energy storage developers that we're working with, there's 4 of them, they'd prefer very much to be away from neighborhoods. Because it's just simpler and easier gets the product online quicker, and you don't have to be concerned about vegetative fencing, screening, or potential blowback from protestation, which is very valid. And what we have found with our renewables companies that we've worked with, and with now these derivative battery energy storage companies, is that they're very mindful of that. They don't want trouble. They do not want to be a bad neighbor.
No.
And
They've
Brittany, to
really,
answer,
they've been very good to deal with.
Yeah.
From a liability standpoint, there's
It's
considerable.
just not, it's not worth the headache for them. They just
No.
want to hook up to the grid as close as they can to a substation, because as you mentioned a second ago, Travis, you get a little bit of latency, and it's more costly if you have to run a lot of lines a long distance. These are not big money makers. You have to build to scale. You have to build a lot of them, because you're selling electricity back to the grid at a rather small percentage on a per diem basis. So it takes decades, really for the thing to really perform, probably 10 years for the thing to really perform as a good asset. And so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to engage in this discussion with you and brought this to Aaron. Aaron did a lot of homework and a lot of prep work trying to find examples of how do we collectively, constructively guide the development of these, because based on what we're seeing at our office, a lot more of these are going to be coming on the way. And we see them as good for the state, good for the grid, but also really good municipal fund generators.
Yeah.
They're just little money boxes, really. And the companies that build them have been very open to suggestion. And so we took that opportunity to deploy our team together, working with Aaron's team on finding a constructive way to make sure that we put good guardrails on these projects, because they want those guardrails. These developers want them. And
think,
right now, there aren't very many.
right.
Yeah, and from looking at the zoning map that's been up forever, heavy manufacturing has risks and problems that exist with any development, generally speaking. And so, to me, it's a natural first step to look at locating them in those zoning districts to start. And as we get more information and more comfortable with the technology and our ability to mitigate some of these concerns, maybe we look at expanding into other parts of the community.
I think that's worthy, because
would be my-
putting on my city service hat, we don't want to see these all just say, don't worry about it, we'll just go out to the county.
Right.
I don't want to see that.
No, we don't
And
either.
none of us do,
No.
because they're good generators of not just electricity, but of municipal tax dollars. So we're trying to figure out exactly how to do it. I can say that the companies that we're working with right now would be very happy to get themselves involved, if invited, into constructive discussions about go-forward plans, not just necessarily for their projects, but for others. They're very passionate about their technology. They've received collectively a lot of funding from a lot of different sources. A lot of energy companies are very interested in creating dispatchable power. And so I would invite that be considered as something we do if we want to put together an even deeper dive comprehensive plan, is to get the industry involved and get them to help guide the dialogue. I think you'll find them very receptive to it.
I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
And one of the things that this discussion brings up, along with the comprehensive plan, is we have some areas in this city that are light manufacturing, that are residential areas and have been for years.
Yes.
And we need to look at those.
Yep.
Yeah, that comes up from time to time when we get manufacturers that find a site that they like and it's buried in the middle of a neighborhood. In fact, in my experience, always they will just avoid it, even if it's perfect, for the obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But that's certainly a very good topic of discussion, and something that I can say we will deliver industry to this discussion. They want to be involved, very much so.
Okay.
Okay, is there anything else, Aaron, you want me to talk about? So we got fire suppression, taxation, connection to the grid.
Yeah.
Okay, very
I think
good.
that's great. Thank you for your input.
Thank you, Mr. Looney.
So I think we're headed in the right general direction. I mean, I think there's still some tweaks to be made. I think a meeting with the industry folks is going to be very helpful in this process, and so I'll be working with Mr. Looney to get something over the next few weeks to meet with them, to let them kind of digest what we think we're going to propose, and then see where the conflicts are and how we can come together and find ways to make this work. Because I think that's the whole goal, is to make them work for our community in multiple ways.
Okay, I agree. Next item is the open structure overlay.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, everyone's favorite topic is open structures, which are typically carports and porches. So we've been, as staff, kind of just trying to decide what to do with the open structure overlay. As you guys recall, we did have an amendment to that map in the last year where we took in a small neighborhood area, about 240 homes. That were between older homes and newer homes, but there were a number of them that had some open structures. Some of them had been built without permits. Some of them had been, if you will, grandfathered in, or maybe gotten a variance or something along the way. So we've been looking at different neighborhoods. So this is just a shot out of a vehicle looking down a relatively new, I would say in the last 10 years, built subdivision, street, road, everything. And this is about 11:30 in the morning. And look how many vehicles are sitting in driveways, and there's at least 3 vehicles on the curb currently, which is also why we have such wide roads of 40 feet that we have to maintain for the perpetuity of that road. All of these homes are built at the 25-foot setback. And not every one of those homes there's vehicles at, but probably there's something going on in the garage that was designed as vehicle storage, but it's not being utilized that way. That's just one block in one neighborhood. This block here, behind them, there is no alleyways either. And that seems to make a difference in areas. Here's just some more. Here's a few vehicles during the daytime, even one that's got a cloth on it that normally you would see that storage in a garage. It's not. Another street, again, multiple vehicles throughout the day. I don't think you can see it here, but right past here, there was almost like a black enclosed tent that enclosed a vehicle. Now, all of this came about after a hailstorm, which we all know that we get here in West Texas, but people are trying to protect their valuables. And as any of y'all that have tried to buy a vehicle in the last 2 years knows that those are very, very valuable to buy. They may drop in value once you buy it, but they're very valuable to buy. Okay, maybe costly. And then I found this one just driving. I was like, what a beautiful example of what meets our ordinance. They're in the open structure. They're the pitch of the roof, the composition of the roof, the style, everything meets our ordinance as it was written back in 2006. So I wanted to make sure that we have one property that's doing it right. So no, there's many others, but that's where the crux of this is really, are open structures inappropriate in a front yard setback? Probably not. In some areas, maybe, but probably not. It comes down to more about the design. And does the design match the house, which enhances the property value, or is it a flat roof carport that's put up in a weekend and it detracts from the value? That's really one of the big questions. Here's some more in backyards. You can just see it back there. Again, it's not in the open structure, but it's in the backyard, so it's allowed to have a flat roof and be able to park because you have an alleyway. Here's one that's not in the open structure on a relatively new house. They built it behind because they couldn't build it in the 25-foot. And they have a garage here. They really don't use that garage anymore. So people's use of garage is also driving this as well. And so now they just have this nice rectangular box on the end of their house. For those of you that like that sort of thing. So, what does our open structure overlay do? And y'all have heard most of this before. It allows for open structures, relatively open structures like porches and carports to be in front of that 25-foot building setback. There are specifics on locations by modified setbacks, meaning that it has to be so far away from the road, it has to be so far away from the side yard setback. There's also specifics in the ordinance that talks about roofing materials and roof slope design. There are times, because we're all human, staff has interpreted that differently throughout the years. And so we get lots of different versions of what it says in the roofing materials and the roof slope. There's also been variances given. And so maybe they don't have to meet that slope. Maybe they don't have to meet the design. There's different things that happen along the way with that ordinance. It was originally designed, the open structure was originally designed for small properties where there was no garage or one-car garage, that they wanted to protect their vehicles. And I also think it was also originally, but not necessarily said as much, these were being built anyway. And so if we did a large part of the city and put them to be allowed by right, that might help things. It hasn't driven them to come and get permits. That hasn't happened. And so there's things there. And it also came about there's too many requests for carports. Carports are a big deal out here in West Texas because of hailstorms and sun damage and whatever else. And you can also start using your garage in a different way if you've got another place to park your vehicles. And that's just part of our American society. So here's what we did, the issues for today. Vehicle sizes, even for those newer homes, if you put two big Ford pickups in there, you're going to have a hard time fitting them both in there. You might get a small vehicle and a big pickup, but a lot of our community, they both drive big vehicles, whether it's an SUV, a pickup style truck, or something else. And we've started using the garage probably since the 80s, and even certainly in the 90s and 2000s, it started becoming a multi-purpose room of just, oh, we got to put more storage out there, or it's a workshop, or it's a man cave, or a she shed. It just turns into all different kinds of things that a garage was intended for differently. The other thing that we're noticing is that subdivisions are built without alleyways, thus backyard parking is not available. If they had backyard parking, we're seeing people put carports in all the time in their backyards because they have an alleyway access. When you take that away, you have no option except going from the front yard somehow. So what does that mean? Allow an open structure overlay to allow them closer, or do we ask for a bigger side yard setback so that you can get a vehicle that goes to the backyard? Maybe two options there. Vehicle values are higher and citizens want to protect their property. I mean, that's pretty obvious. That's what people are really building carports for, is to protect their property, trying to prevent hail, wind damage, storm damage of some kind, trees falling on them, those types of things. The other thing that we've noticed is contractors are not getting a permit because they believe there are delays. They perceive there are delays. We pulled the data for all carports in the last 2 years, and a proper set of carport plans, which means we even give them the plans there in the permit office if they want to use those plans, gets approved in 1.5 days. The ones that don't, it's because they don't know how to build a carport to code, or they're just doing it anyway. So possible next steps, look to expand the open structure overlay in more areas of our community. Decide if the design guidelines are worth opening up and saying, all right, what does slope really mean? What does roofing materials really mean? Review the other ordinances to require rear yard access. If we had a wider access to the backyard, even if they didn't have an alleyway, does that solve part of the problem? Hey, you can't put it in the front yard, but you got room on the side yard. You got 12 feet there. You can do a driveway and get to the backyard. Strong support of enforcement staff when violations for no permit are found. I think that needs to be known, that if you're building a carport in the community inside the city limits, you got to have a permit. There's not a style of carport to be built in the city limits without a permit. And if your contractor comes to your door and they don't have a permit, you should reject them. You tell them, you go to the city and get a permit. Now, I know a lot of people think that takes time. It really, really doesn't. Reality is, it does not take time. It takes time out of their day to go down, turn in the forms, and get it done correctly. And then that carport's going to be better in the long run. Request staff to create some interpretation documents and standards for carports built in the front 25-foot setback. We have a lot of those in our building permit side that they give them how to do the correct spans, particularly metal carports, which we see a lot of, the correct spans, all those types of things. So we have that, but maybe we need to put in some interpretation documents of, all right, we will always interpret roof material and slope to mean whatever it is that we mean as city staff, so it doesn't change over time. So these are just some possible next steps. I'm sure some of you have some of your own ideas, but we didn't want to come forward with saying, oh, we need to expand this to Pauline, or we need to expand this to the Bluffs, or we need to expand this to Reagan, although I think Reagan's covered. But we need maybe some more direction of, is this worth our time, or should we be putting our efforts back in? Let's support our enforcement team, let's interpret our ordinances correctly, and let's say this is what it's supposed to mean. So with that, Chairman, I'll let y'all have discussion.
So the overlay part is only like if it's within the right of way, correct?
Correct. If you're in the overlay zone, you have to be 5 feet back from the property line or 10 feet back from the right of way, from the street curb, actually, is what it says. And so that means you're probably going to be 10 feet back. Normally, our right of ways are 5 feet. And so you're going to have a structure within 10 feet of the road surface if that house was built at the 25-foot setback.
Right, okay. So I mean, and that's why I guess I was making sure, because like if I had room to the side of my house, I could just get a carport permit. It's
Correct.
not
You
an
can get a
overlay
you can have a carport designed
So it
in
would be in
any
areas
style.
that have that capability that we would necessarily
Correct.
do it, just the areas that are smaller, closer.
Right. Now, they still have to meet the side yard setback. There is a rear yard setback for what we would call an accessory structure. There's some setbacks to meet, but design criteria goes out the window when it's within the building with the right setbacks.
My concern is that allowing the open structure overlay for our entire community is really a means of sidestepping the setback requirements that our subdivision ordinance has established.
Correct.
And to me, it's Pandora's box. Go back to that carport that you said looked good, and it did. But I want you to look at what's under the carport. Go back a couple more. Look at all the stuff that's stacked under that carport.
Yeah.
So I understand that people want to protect their vehicles. I get it. I just don't know why we don't have alleyways. Why aren't we building on a 50-foot lot with an alleyway where you can put a carport in the back, and it's not crowding on the street and.
A lot of it's the development cost, I mean, because the developers are coming in, putting all the infrastructure in, plus the front street, and then adding an alley. I mean, it's getting to the point that the lot cost is so expensive that they can't sell them.
I don't know if I agree with that. I understand that it's an elevated cost, but if the alternative is this, to allow this everywhere in our community, then maybe we need to look at changing our zoning ordinances, or our subdivision ordinances, excuse me. I don't know. That's just my opinion.
I would think so, that having been around the real estate business for a number of years, the majority of the ones that look bad or tacky, or like the one on the gray house you had, is because owners don't, they think they can, well, it's my lot, my land, I'll do whatever I want to. And the majority of what we see in the way of these carports have no contact with the city at all.
No.
The majority of them just did what they wanted to do, and that's why they don't conform, and the setbacks aren't right. And then, that one good one, the front looks good, but I agree, they
Right.
still use the underneath for some storage.
Becomes an outdoor storage area.
Because it looks to me like they took in the garage to make another room. it wouldn't have been built like that. So
Right.
we have that as a major problem, I think, all across the different neighborhoods, just people not doing the correct thing, and that's finding out from the city, what can I do, what can I not do? As far as the building of alleys or no alleys with the new construction, I agree with Brittany. I think that the builders and those that are having to put those streets in and all the curbing or whatever, they're making as much of a financial decision by not putting the a back alley way in. Now, I don't like the streets that one side has a front garage and the other side has a back alley where their garage is. I don't like streets like that. I think they're non-conforming to each other. But I just think that a lot of this is education, but I don't know that we, the city, have bad regulations. I think the public doesn't know there are regulations to some degree.
And just being in the industry too, and working with a lot of different developers and builders, the problem is too, you sell that home and that home is somebody's home for 4 years, maybe it's 15 years,
Yeah.
but then even though it's stated in the restrictions, the next property owner doesn't read the restrictions. So therefore, in some of these, for instance, a lot of these photos were done in Pauline, and that gray house in particular, that was built in 2012, but this is probably the third or fourth property owner of it,
Yeah.
and they never took the time to read or understand, therefore that's what you get essentially. So.
Would a carport be considered within the setback requirements of a lot?
Yes. it
If
is
you're
a-
looking at a building footprint, would a carport constitute some improvement that
Yes.
requires a setback,
Yes.
Even though it's open air.
even though it's open?
Yes.
So I think that's my biggest point here is if we're going to allow open structure carports community-wide, if that's an option for dealing with this problem that these folks have, then we're moving the setback to 5 or 10 feet.
See, and I don't like that.
And that really
You're right.
crowds the street and
does.
tightens things up. And, we had setbacks put in the ordinance
For a reason.
for a reason to begin with. And that's why I understand there's a little bit of an elevated cost, but if the convenience is to be able to build a carport without a lot of hassle from the city, you don't have to meet the aesthetic guidelines. If you're building a carport in the back of your property, you might have to pull a permit still, but it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
So how many storage buildings do we have? Which, in essence, is typically why you run into that, because you store stuff in your garage instead
Absolutely.
of parking your garage. So,
Well, the other part on the alley, and I agree, I like alleys because it makes the front of the home look cleaner.
Fantastic.
Yes.
But it also is a cost that is then passed to the city of maintenance, and so, it's just kind of a double-edged sword on that as well.
Yeah.
I don't think, why they're not doing it today with some of the new construction is cost. But
homeowners doing it as well.
those that have a carport put on the back in the Southland area, and off the top of my head, I can see 2 or 3 right now. You go down the alley, and they had their 2-car garage, and they put a carport almost to the end of the driveway, but it's not in the front of the house.
Right.
And it's like they have 4 cars, or they want a dance hall out in the backyard, or I don't know what it's for, but at least you don't realize it from
Yes,
the
ma'am.
front, and the setbacks and the look of the street looks nice. But we have a lot of homes that were built even with alleys, with the garage in the front, just because that was what was built in those timeframes. So I don't know how you can't correct it all for individual neighborhood, unless you went neighborhood by neighborhood, and I don't think that's what we need to do, but setbacks, I'm big on if the setback is done right and now like that one, go back to that. I mean, the setbacks, right, because the house is, but it looks cheap and,
Our panel.
just, I don't know.
Well, I think that's the whole point. Like, that's the whole reason for reason why people are adding carports and closing in garages and skirting the requirements or not going to the city at all.
Yeah.
Is cost. And I think it's the same reason why developers aren't putting alleys in is because of cost. So that's the cheapest solution, is to utilize the space that you pay less for in your house, which is a garage, and enclose it, and then tack on a lean-to that you can park your car under. And I mean, you can't get around the cost. Someone has to pay for it at some point. So I think, if we've decided and there's an ordinance in place, it just needs to be enforced, and I think that's the first step. And maybe there's some tweaks that need to be done to that too. But the enforcement piece of it is the biggest issue in my mind, because there's just no consistency. And so you've got somebody who went to the trouble, like the Brown picture that we saw, that actually probably did get that permitted, and it does comply. What they put under it, I don't know how you can really control that so much, but at least they did what they're supposed to do. And I think then you can really see, is our ordinance something that we need to address, or is it just the enforcement?
Have we ever, I know it's a staff, too much for staff to have to do, but to drive the streets and say, this one's out of compliance, this one is in, and send some kind of notice? I mean, what would you do with that?
I think that's
that would be like.
Guys could tackle that.
I think that's what.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
I think doing some neighborhood sweeps would be very beneficial, and that would
Yes.
be working with our code enforcement team and maybe even our animal services team, that you can partner up some different folks in the vehicle and you do some neighborhood sweeps in some targeted areas and see what comes of that, do some data mining.
I was being facetious, but yes, I was thinking I don't know how you
then you
would
would
have
see
time
what
to do anything like
Yeah.
that. I don't know.
But it sounds like supportive enforcement
Yeah,
agents doing their
If we're
role.
not enforcing, then that's why
Yeah.
they think, well, they're not gonna do anything, I'll just do what I wanna do.
that's
That's
way
an
misleading.
attitude.
Find
a lot easier.
scenario there.
Yeah.
So if we're not enforcing it, that causes no compliance in a lot of cases.
Yeah. I think we have a number of different types of development items. I don't want to say the word signs that happen once in a while. So, but yeah, that's what we were from city staff, we're thinking that as well, is that this really isn't, we have in place ways to solve this issue. We just don't maybe have the right staffing or maybe the right support to go say, this is a priority. Maybe there's different priorities, and maybe that's where we need to refocus on what is the way to go and deal with this, as opposed to rewriting an ordinance or coming up with, okay, let's blanket the city with this, and then we just turn our blind eye to it.
Yeah.
Guidelines and ordinances all day long, if we don't do something to,
Gotta enforce them.
like on our.
They don't mean anything if they're not enforced.
Short-term rentals.
Correct.
We've been watchful, and if there was a lot of complaints or they were operating without the license, and we've not approved those. But the majority of the public who own property don't want them. But we've approved them, we have guidelines, and for some reason, we're able to keep that in check. This is just out of check, and
Okay.
that's.
Comments heard. We will discuss that and spread that, and planning will certainly support whatever departments need support in helping make that a reality.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron. Public comment, issues or concerns not on the regular agenda can be addressed at this time. Anyone wish to speak in public comment? Open.
This whole time.
Yeah, yeah.
I do have one thing. We were talking about the short-term rentals, and I know there was an issue with not paying the local tax. And we had talked about Airbnb getting the city registered, and I think you had said that the finance department was in charge of that. Have you had any updates from them on where things are with that?
We are working on that together now, and we
Okay.
will get that moving forward.
Okay,
So,
awesome. I think that's going to make
yes.
a huge difference for you guys.
We also have a software that will be coming online in the next 30 days to 60 days that will help with complaints as well as with operators being able to get in
Okay.
and things like that. And so as well as we've reclassified one of our positions, that we have a new employee starting on October 1 that's going to go out and do short-term rental enforcement. They'll also follow up on some of these notice of violations like carports and
Awesome.
certainly building violations, building without permits and things like that. So we're excited about where that's going.
That's wonderful news. Okay.
That want these short-term rentals, and they do everything they can to get ready. They pass all the tests that they've got to pass. They come and make an application, and a year later they go, "Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to pay taxes. Didn't know I was supposed to renew." If you're really doing it right, and you've already done it right to begin with, to start it, come on. You know you're supposed to do those things, and it really is hard on me that.
Yeah. I will say our staff
some of
team
them
has done a
don't.
great job of trying to educate them when they come in. They'll even walk
I'm
them over
sure.
to permits, they walk them to finance. So they're getting the handheld version of how things go instead of the adult version of, all right, here's your rules, follow them. If you don't,
Like
we're
putting your
gonna
name in
penalize you.
in the house of who you could call if there's a problem and all those things that
Yeah.
they know it, they're just not doing it. And that-
We understand. And I
have
think
no-
y'all feel that quite a bit, yes.
Yeah.
We understand.
I'm going to close public comment. Planning Director's report.
First, I want to introduce Kim Garmany. She's our new Planning and Development Services Administrator. So the position formerly was Planning Manager, but she's over this. This is her monkeys, her circus. So this will be hers.
And what's her name? I didn't get it.
Kim.
Kim, I can remember that.
Yeah. Kim. So very excited for her to be with us. You'll start seeing her at these meetings and other meetings, but she's going to be guiding our planning. She's helping us with some grant writing as well as looking big picture items. What do we do with comp plans and the plans that Sherry talked about how do we reincorporate those into our day-to-day decision making? So we're very excited about that.
Great.
I believe it's going to be November. There's a slight potential October, but November, we're looking at doing a joint meeting with City Council. We actually are going to look at next year, calendar year, doing 2 joint meetings every year so that we can discuss items that are big picture items that if we need to take action, we have everybody there. But particularly, we have a cultural district coming forward that Sherry Bailey's been working on. She's about to get that out here soon to the committee that helped with that. And then we'll probably have something maybe on the battery, energy, and storage, that stuff to talk about and possibly move forward. But that's why we're thinking maybe November. We don't want to push to December. We want to get some of those things moved through. But we're going to be looking at that. So I don't know if it will be the second meeting in November of City Council, which I think is the day after Veterans Day. I think that's the 15th. I should look at my calendar. And then y'all typically have your Monday meeting the week after. So start looking at those dates and times and seeing if we have enough availability for quorum. But we feel like we're going to make that decision within the next 2 weeks so that we know what that date is going to be.
Okay. Follow-up and administrative issues, announcements and considerations. The next regular meeting of the Planning Commission is scheduled to begin Monday, October 21st at 9 a.m., East Mezzanine Room, City Hall. 72 West College Avenue, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? 5-0. It's 11:55.